and that's underway at the moment. So the second part then of this conference is going to focus on the economy. And in a very short while, I can see Cassie's with us, and I'll introduce her properly in a moment. We're going to hear from Cassie, and we're going to hear from Rob Shorter from the Donors Economics Action Lab. And we're also going to be having a breakout session with Sara Marsh, who's the Chief Executive of Suburban Community Trust, whose community larder has been opened up in lots of communities all over Cornwall. And over on the Chaos channel, we have Monique Collins from Disc-Nuki, who's going to be talking about housing. And many of you might have seen lots of PR that
I think we have just lost Helen for a second. I hope that's not me. So we'll just give Helen just a couple of seconds just to get back on board. I'm just wondering, just whilst I help Helen reconnect, Cassie, if you wouldn't mind, maybe this is a good time to give you a couple of moments just to introduce yourself, just whilst I dial Helen back in.
Sure. Hopefully everyone can hear me. It's really lovely to be here. And I work at the National Lottery Community Fund, where I'm the Deputy Director of Funding Strategy. And I know I've seen Jenny Fish in the chat, so I know we've got some of the local regional team here for the Southwest who probably in some ways would be better speaking here than me, but it's very nice to be asked. And I'm going to basically spend the first 10 minutes actually doing a bit of an imagination exercise with you. And then I'm going to share a little bit about some of the ways we're thinking about transformative change and kind of what's required of us in these times. And if we're thinking about alternative or new economies, what might we need to do in terms of the groundwork for that? So yeah, I don't know, Tom, if you want me to just keep going or if we're waiting.
Thanks, Cassie. So I think Helen's just going to I think Helen's back with us. Fantastic. Perfect timing. Thanks, Cassie. And Helen, you're just on mute.
Apologies for that, colleagues. I've no idea why it chucked me out. Cassie and colleagues, did you hear the biog for Cassie that I gave or not, or was I out at that point?
I think we might have just, if you just give a quick, maybe a quick intro, I think that would be great.
Okay, I'll just go quickly through there. So Cassie is the Deputy Director of Funding Strategy at the National Lottery Community Fund. She's responsible for innovation policy and practice. She prefers to live in more liminal spaces. She's taken on roles and projects that span the whole ecosystem of social change. She has a focus on justice and a more equitable and regenerative society. So thank you for joining us, Cassie, and it's over to you, and I'll let you know when you have 5 minutes left. Thank you, Cassie.
Great, thank you. So yeah, some of what I'm going to speak about today is about, as I said, our sort of collective imaginations. If we know that our economic models are not working for many people, how are we going to rethink or redesign them? And for me, that always comes back to what we imagine is possible. And I guess it's interesting being here for the previous talks where we did, from the beautiful animation shared, we did sort of get a sense of what might be possible in the future. But I'm actually going to invite you all now to close your eyes. And I'm just going to switch my camera off for this bit. So yeah, close your eyes if you feel able to, or you can just lower your gaze. And we're going to travel in our imaginations to 2030. But this is not to be the 2030 of the dystopia we can more readily imagine, but rather a place we hear far less of, the 2030 that turned out okay. I invite you to imagine that the years between now and then are a time of remarkable social transformation, which was unimaginable in 2021. I invite you to imagine that a cascade of change was unleashed, some triggered by crises like the COVID-19 pandemic that reset our patterns of work, travel, and showed us how much communities can come together. Other change has been triggered by the school strikes for climate, the Sunrise Movement, and other local but connected projects and movements across the globe, so that a momentum has built and has become unstoppable. The pressure for this positive change has come from business, from local government, from communities, from schools and universities. A hunger for a new culture has built and spread rapidly after a few global crises that jolted us into a collaborative action that we needed. Cities have been reimagined and new relationships exist between rural communities and their nearest towns. As cars were designed out of city centres, huge amounts of space in need of alternative use has opened up. The change that's unfolded has been underpinned by social, climate, and racial justice, community involvement and empowerment, and has been focused on building a new, just, diverse, more resilient economy from the ground up. It's been 10 years characterised by remarkable change that future generations will sing great songs about and tell great tales about the courageous and focused people of this time. It's a time when we feel we've been doing everything we could possibly have done. Take your imaginations for a walk through Cornwall. The fields, the roads, the beaches, the streets, the public spaces, the village community, the high streets, the rural villages, a community space, the local park, the health centre of this 2030 of your imagining. Use all your senses. What can you see and feel and touch and smell and hear? What can you taste of this future world? And just stay in that moment. And now I invite you to open your eyes. And if you wanted to put anything in the chat about what you saw or heard or experienced, a word, or you can just pause for a moment. And if we had time now, I'd invite you to take what you imagined and do a backcasting activity, thinking about, well, what will get us there? And that's how I interpret what Bill Sharp calls the patterning of hope. And I know hope has been a feature of some of the word clouds today. And I guess I just always like to remember that all of the actions, all of the considerations, everything that we're doing in each moment is some way a patterning of our future. It imbues our future consciousness. And that's what I just wanted to start the session with, because I really believe in the power of our collective imaginations. So now I'm just going to switch over to some slides, which hopefully you can now see. And I can't see or hear anyone now, so if anyone could just shout out, yes, I can see your slides, that would be great.
Yes.
Great. So I just love this idea that we dream not just for ourselves, but as part of the larger community in which we live. And I guess one of the things that I think is so important is, you know, what would happen if we positioned civil society further upstream instead of always pushing it downstream only as the problem solver? And how might the world be shaped differently if the wisdom in communities was used to shape, not just to respond? And I love this quote: designing policy or strategy without an imaginative sense of where you are going means your best efforts will land you toward the front of the status quo, but not ahead of it. Imagination enlightens strategy, policy, and programming, and helps you break free of institutional thinking that leads you to piecemeal reform. And again, I'm going to keep coming back to this idea of why it's important at this time to think beyond what we already know and understand, and to really invest in our collective imagination. And I think that's because a lot of the time, we are often just making things better in our existing systems, plaster sticking, shifting power, but it's always still within this existing system, rather than really supporting the transition to something new or reimagining a completely different system or philosophy. I'm going to skip a couple of these because of time. And the reason why I think it's so important to think about the transition to something entirely new, again, it comes back to this imagining what's possible further upstream, which I think is very different from consultation or co-design. For me, it's about investing in the soil, which is our collective imagination. So I'm just going to talk a bit now about our Emerging Futures Fund, which was something that we launched last summer. We did a lot of crisis funding and responsive funding in relation to the pandemic, but we also recognised that we really did need to resource and create the space for communities across the UK to think differently and to imagine differently. And that felt really important because it felt like a lot of the normal voices and the usual suspects and the same old ideas were appearing in those narratives about the new normal, build back better, through the portal. And we wanted to make sure that different voices, different communities were centred in thinking about the future. And also, there's been such a move in civil society to think more about data and to value data, which I am really supportive of because data can be very useful. But I think we have to remember what isn't in the data. It doesn't help us imagine beyond what we know and understand in the present. And we definitely need new myths, new stories. Because we are, as this quote from Tim Jackson says, clinging on to myths that are actually very unhelpful. So the Emerging Futures Fund was trying to seed work that was about the collective imagination, community-led foresight, seeding new narratives and seeds of alternative systems. And we really wanted to be able to say that we were resourcing civil society powered by local communities to be more equipped and able to anticipate, imagine and shape their futures. And so we invested in initiatives that were at a neighbourhood level, at a town level, at a city level. We did 52 grants all across the UK. Some of them were very directly feeding into future town plans or city plans, working in partnership with local government. Some were asking questions about what are our new models of ownership? How can we live and think differently about housing, about who owns land? What are our shared assets in communities? Some of the grants have been thinking about what do our new patterns of work need to look like? How can we work differently? What kinds of new jobs are going to need to exist? What kind of working hours might we have? And some of the grants were focused on very specific experiences during the pandemic. And those voices that we don't normally necessarily hear so much from. And some have been about creating new infrastructure. So the Centre for Knowledge Equity has created an Imaginarium for people with lived experience, and the Design Council setting up a new community design network. And one of the projects I'm going to talk in a bit more detail about was in Barrow, which, like Cornwall, has some very high levels of deprivation. And what was particularly interesting about the project in Barrow is it was a kind of a methodology around collective imagination in partnership with the local community and in partnership with the council. So they did a sort of town-wide, region-wide engagement around what is the boldest dreams for Barrow. They engaged tens of hundreds of people from across Barrow through phone lines, through workshops, through journeys that they took them on. And they did all of this online, which was quite amazing. And they really took them on a voyage, drawing on the local area, drawing on the natural world, to imagine something new and different for Barrow. This is one of the illustrations from that work. And I think what's been so powerful about that work is that now the local government have embedded the new principles for the future of Barrow into its kind of constitution. And everyone that's taken part in it, because it was a very different kind of experience that drew on feeling, emotion, embodiment, future gazing, foresight, like all these practices that are very different from just going into a village hall with some pens and paper, but deep work to really think differently about the future. It was a profound experience, and it means that they have come up with ideas that they just wouldn't have come up with before. And another one, the People's Podium, which has gone around the country to a lot of the places that really are in decline from industrialisation and really do need to reimagine what they can now be instead. And the people living in those communities taking it in turns to speak for what they wanted to see. And that's been, travelling around the UK. And I think what's important, again, about some of this work is how do we equip and resource people to think differently about what they want? It's really hard giving a blank sheet of paper to people to say, imagine a new economy, imagine new ways of working, imagine a different relationship with the land. Like this work needs to be experiential and rigorous and deep. I'm going to skip through because I think I'm probably running out of time. Another initiative we've invested in is the Future Narratives Lab, working with shared assets, thinking about new narratives around ownership of land. And they've done some lovely work creating these new narratives to now be shared more widely, and with the hope to sort of influence wider change. Sorry, there's lots of clicks on this one. And we did an event yesterday where we had 700 people attend, which was a phenomenal amount of people, all interested in this idea of the relationship between imagination and infrastructure. So if we think about infrastructure as something that we invest in over the long term, how do we actually invest in our collective imagination? How do we not just jump into citizen assemblies and democratic processes and consultations and co-designs, as important as those are, but how do we resource that further upstream thinking and imagining over time and more deeply? And those are some of the things that we're thinking about in the work I'm doing at the fund through the Emerging Futures Fund, which is, long-term investment in that capacity, and what are the spaces, places, practices and relationships for that kind of work. And then I was just going to end on one of the other pieces of work that we're doing that I think is really important if we're going to have the kind of transitional change that we need, is to think more broadly about the different layers of change that we need to influence. This is something called the Gill Social Technical Transitions Theory that we've added another layer to. So at the lottery, we do a lot of funding at that niche level and at that soil and roots level, community initiatives, really important. But actually, if we don't also think about the landscape, the new narratives, the large economic influences, the impacts of the power of big tech, and if we don't think about the new rules and the new regulations and the sort of policies and new institutions that we need, we're never going to really see the kind of transitions that we need. So I guess I would encourage everyone here today, I'm sure many of you do already, I don't want to assume that you don't, but to think about these different layers of change, to think about what your role is in the ecosystem. What's the role of an infrastructure organisation? What's the role of a community initiative? What's the role of a local neighbourhood group? What's the role of your local authority? How can you all come together? Because I love this idea that you are only as good as your ecosystem. And if we want new economies, if we want to shift our economy, if we want to find better ways of living within the donut, which I'm sure Rob will talk about next, then we're going to have to do that together. And so shared missions, no sectors, no silos, investing in that interdependence that we actually already have, but is also the answer to how we're going to affect this kind of scale of change that we need to see.
Are you?
Yeah, that's me.
That's amazing. I really was Tom, good news. I was really loath to interrupt you because it was just so captivating, and I feel like I've got somebody who's put some words to how I think and feel and imagine, because I think like a lot of us as children, we were really liberated to imagine, weren't we? And somehow as adults, we have not been as encouraged to imagine our future. So starting there, I felt really grounded, Cassie, as I'm sure my colleagues did, in that journey that you took us on through the imagination, and then the theory and the practice that you outlined was just breathtaking. And I'm so excited to be looking at some of the theories that you've outlined as well. As you can see, I'm just so excited about what you've opened me up to. But what's really refreshing, Cassie, is when we began this journey of co-creating Cornwall's future, we started with the metaphor of a tree, and my colleagues thought I was quite mad when I asked them to dig a hole in the garden and let us sort of create an interlocking root system with some of the words that you shared in your image there of the root system, hope and and those things. So to see you and the theory come together there was really encouraging, that we have got an imagination in Cornwall. We do believe in an interlocking root system. We do believe in standing shoulder to shoulder as civil leaders in civil society. And we do believe that we will bear fruit. And I think one of the quotes that I saw that was really inspiring was, what comes to us as seed will go to the next generation as blossom. So you're preaching to the converted, but how you did that was just breathtaking. So thank you so much, Cassie. And I just want to invite my colleagues to give you a round of applause, if colleagues wouldn't mind putting their cameras on and off mute. I hope you felt encouraged by us there, Cassie, and we'll be checking out all of those funding streams that you've outlined and liberating our chance to imagine in some of those applications. So I'm just going to skip back to my notes, colleagues, and keep us back on track here. So what we've got now is an opportunity to do a Mentimeter on a question on slide 32, and then I'll introduce our workshop facilitators and give you a little bit of a biog on them. So Tom, if you would mind pulling that next slide up.
I think if it's okay, we're going to do this one in the chat box, Helen, if that's all right.
No, that's absolutely fine. Completely understand.
So I'll bring that one up just for you now.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And what I'll do while colleagues are having a look and responding to that, I'll get you ready to hear about our next speakers. So in a few moments, you're going to be invited to listen to Rob Shorter from Donor Economics Action Lab, or go into a breakout room to listen to Sara Marsh, the Chief Executive of Treverben Community Trust. And I'll give you a bit of an intro into Rob. He leads Deal's work with communities of place and purpose, and they're drawing on the core concepts of the donor economics model to respond to the ecological emergency and social inequality. His work has also been exploring the role of imagination in steering humanity towards a world in which people and the planet thrive in balance. And he is most interested in the ways in which everybody can contribute to this collective challenge. And as part of his work, he's dialed an imagination sundial. So that's going to be really interesting to see. It's a framework which is drawn to intentionally enable you to cultivate the collective imagination. And he puts this in practice in his work with Amnesty International, as well as being picked up by educators and community organisations around the world. So in a moment, you'll be invited to stay in here and listen to Rob's work, or go across to our local heroes presentation, Sara Marsh, who's the Chief Executive of Treverben Community Trust. And I've had a great privilege working with Sara throughout the pandemic. She has an exemplar track record in helping people overcome food poverty, and her innovative work around community larders has really, enabled a lot of people to be fed during the pandemic, and communities to come together. She's brilliant at working with other agencies and is incredibly inspiring. So we've got Sara Marsh over in the breakout room. So without further ado, I'm just going to skip back to some of your comments in chat and see if there's anything I can just reflect on there before that invitation to go across. Lots of feedback on that and lots of praise for Cassie. So we'll park that there. We might revisit it. So without further ado, can I invite you, Tom, to instruct people how they can find their way into the right place?
Of course, thank you, Helen. So same as before, the same rooms. So if you'd like to stay and listen to Rob, you can stay here in the main room. But if you would like to move over to the breakout room, the links for that are in the agenda document, which is in the chat, and I will just post that for you again. So that's breakout room 1. It's the same room that Emily was in for the previous session. So the link for that is in the chat box in the agenda, or the initial Eventbrite invitation. So in this room for Rob's session, and over in the breakout room for Sarah's session. And as before, if you have any problems or questions moving to the breakout room, please do pop them in the chat box, and we'll get straight to you. So you don't need to leave the session. You can just click on the links in the agenda document, the link, either breakout room 1 or Sarah's name, to move over to Sarah's session in the breakout room. So we'll just give people a couple of minutes just to move over, and then we can. I'll hand over to you, Helen and Rob.
Okay, and Rob, as we're waiting for colleagues to move over, just to say I'll give you 5 minutes towards the end of your presentation, and we're running 5 minutes behind schedule, colleagues, but we'll make up the time. So, Rob, I think you're going to control your own slide deck. Is that
That's right? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You want to get them ready?
Great.
So just a quick reminder again, if you're joining us partway through today's session, we are running in two rooms for this this bit of the presentation. So in this main room for Rob's session, and you can stay in here for that. But if you would like to go over to Sara Marsh's breakout session, the link for that is in the agenda document or the initial Eventbrite page, and that is in breakout room 1 for Sarah's session. It looks like lots of people are heading over to Sarah's session as well, which is fantastic. So I'll hand over to yourself, Rob, I think.
Thanks, Tom. Can you see the screen? Can you see?
Yes.
Big yellow screen. Fantastic. So it's wonderful to be here, part of this event for co-creating Cornwall's future. About 13 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I was involved in volunteering at the Eden Project. And I love that quote that Helen shared around planting the seeds for the future. And I felt that that's where really the seeds of the work I do now were really planted. And I actually saw the person I stayed with at the time, Deborah Hinton, in the audience. So it's lovely to see you. I was staying just south of St Austell, so great to be here again. Yes, so as you heard, I'm the Communities Lead for Donor Economics Action Lab, or DEAL, where we support communities of place and purpose around the world who are self-organizing around the ideas of donor economics to reimagine the economy and have tools for action, how they can start putting these ideas into practice. So today I just want to share some of those ideas and some frameworks that you can immediately start using. And just to start, I think it's worth acknowledging the state of the economy that we find, the context of the economy we find ourselves in, because it's been a very turbulent 20 years at the beginning of the 21st century of repeated crises, from financial meltdown in 2008 to the ongoing climate and ecological breakdown to our most recent COVID lockdown. And these repeated crises are telling us many things, such as we're very interconnected with each other and the natural world. And they're revealing the sharp inequalities of race, gender, power, and wealth within nations and across nations. And they're also showing us that these crises are coming largely out of the systems that we've created, and systems that we can recreate and reimagine. And these are systems that are based largely on the assumption that endless expansion is possible, endless expansion of financial markets, endless expansion of industrial systems, endless expansion of our reach into natural ecosystems. And we have to ask the question, is this shape of endless expansion the shape of progress we need to continue with the 21st century, or do we need to imagine something different? And so that's where the role of the donut comes in. So we want to offer this as a compass for the 21st century, whose goal is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet, where we don't fall short on the essentials of life in the hole in the middle, essentials of food, water, health, education, income, peace and justice, political voice. So these have been crowdsourced from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and that's 193 of the world's governments agreeing to these. So everyone has a claim to these things to live a good life. So meeting the needs of all people to hit the social foundation, but at the same time not putting so much pressure on the planet that we're overshooting the ecological ceiling and polluting the air, changing the climate, acidifying the oceans, and destroying biodiversity. And so this comes from the 9 planetary boundaries as identified by Earth system science. And so we've now got this compass where we can see both the social foundation and the ecological ceiling, and this space that we want to be in the middle, the safe and just space for humanity. And it's recognizing this holistic view of the economy is one of holistic health, of human and planetary health. It's one of balance rather than endless expansion. And this notion of balance isn't new. It goes into deep ancient cultures, from the Taoist yin yang to the Maori takarangi to the Celtic double spiral and the Buddhist endless knot. But if this is our view of the world we want, we are far from it now, with the red in the middle showing billions of people are falling short on the essentials of good life, where at the same time high-income countries are mainly contributing to collectively overshooting on 4 of the 9 planetary boundaries, putting enormous pressure on the planet. We are the first generation to see this challenge, and it's our choice to choose how we proceed. Do we proceed with the models, the thinking, the policies that got us here? Or do we reimagine that thinking, the models and the policies to bring us back into balance from both sides? And so what we propose with donut economics is 2 ways to redesign those things to bring us back into balance. So how do we get into the donut? Well, the first thing is we need to be regenerative by design, recognizing that we've inherited a linear, degenerative industrial system where we take Earth's resources, we make them into things we want, use them for a while, sometimes only once, and then throw them away. But we need to turn that linear, those arrows around so that we're regenerative and restorative. Regenerative agriculture and more circular economics, where we recognize that we don't have to own everything to use things, where we can run on renewables, where we can be modular by design, we can have repair cafes, we can have clothes swaps, we can do all kinds of things to imaginative ways to bring the cycles to work with and within the cycles of the living world. So to be regenerative by design is one thing, but we also need to be distributive by design, where we're sharing value and opportunity far more equitably amongst all those who co-create it. And that means everyone in society. We're recognizing we've inherited a very divisive and centralizing system that centralizes and concentrates value and opportunity in the hands of a few, giving rise to the 1% and massive inequality. So a really great example of distributive design in the UK is community wealth building, where anchor institutions and local governments are sharing their procurement budgets with local cooperatives and social enterprises. And distributive design can flow through all of our systems, through the food systems, energy systems, through how we share knowledge and ideas, to how we then produce locally, how we can fabricate things based on those ideas. So regenerative design and distributive design can help us get into this holistic goal of the donut. But whilst that's a holistic goal, we also need to think holistically about what the economy is as well. So we offer this holistic view of what the economy is, called the embedded economy diagram, recognizing the economy is embedded within the social construct of society, which is in turn embedded within the living earth, where we're drawing in energy and matter, and we're giving out waste heat and waste matter. And if we look into the economy itself, we see 4 realms of economic provisioning: the market, state, household, and commons. The mainstream economics really is synonymous with the market, where we are characterized by this caricature of rational economic man, where we have self-interest at heart, we have a wallet in our hand and a calculator in our head, and that's all we are. We are consumer, producer, creditor, or debtor. And it's such a narrow view of all the roles that we play. Because in the state, we are public servant, resident, voter, protester. In the household, parent, partner, relative, child. In the commons, volunteer, sharer, co-creator, and steward, and many more. And we move seamlessly between all of these different roles, and day by day and across the week. And we need to recognize and value our contributions to provisioning for all of our needs across all of these roles. But so many of them are invisible because they're not measured within GDP of the market and state. The unpaid work of the household and the commons is so often overlooked. But when COVID came and the market predominantly closed, that's when the other roles stepped in. And so we saw the state step up with health support and support for workers. We saw the household take on more responsibilities for care work, for educating work, for helping workers actually have space to work. And then we saw the resurgence of the commons with the rise of more mutual aid groups and neighbours connecting up and down the street and supporting each other. And we moved away from this notion of the singular rational economic man, and we recognize the collective and recognize the qualities of what we really enjoy about when we come together through all these roles. Now, the voluntary and community sector operates across all of these different spheres of economic provisioning. So we need to recognize how we need to recognize them, we need to value them, and we need to understand how we create more balance across all of these, and the role of the state to create the right policies and regulations to give space to how they all work together. So this is a holistic view of the economy in the way that we've got a holistic goal of the donut. So how do we then take the idea of the donut, using these models of the economy, and apply it to a place? So we've developed a framework to allow us to take the overarching donut and apply it to a specific place. So how can Cornwall live in the donut? Well, first of all, let's unroll it and let's look at that space within the donut. And if we squish it together, we can create this this canvas here, this space for imagining and envisioning the future we want to co-create. So we've got the social foundation at the bottom, we've got the ecological ceiling at the top. But we've also recognized we can have a local aspiration and a global responsibility of our impact. And so we're using this canvas with communities and cities and places to pour in your ideas, initiatives, to identify opportunities and gaps and synergies and connections. So I want to introduce that to you now as a tool that you can then take away and use within your organizations and communities. So here's the canvas itself. And we ask the question, how can Cornwall be home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And so the 4 questions to unpick that, the 4 lenses that we invite are, how can all the people of Cornwall thrive? How can Cornwall thrive within its natural habitat? How can Cornwall respect the health of the whole planet? And how can Cornwall respect the well-being of all people? So firstly, how can all the people of Cornwall thrive? Well, only the people of Cornwall can decide what that is based on your unique culture, history, and aspirations of what it means to live a good life. So what does it mean to be healthy, to have good food and housing and mental health and culture? And what has COVID revealed that shows what's we're most vulnerable to at the moment, and how do we build resilience into that and recognize what we want to build for going forward? How can Cornwall thrive within its natural habitat? So where on earth is Cornwall? What's the unique biome and place in which it exists, and what's nature's genius there? So how does nature design and clean the air, house biodiversity, store carbon, cycle fresh water? And how can we learn from nature and design our places in the same way, using nature as mentor and as our measure? And so these can enable us to be thriving in our thriving place. And so it's our local aspiration, but we have to recognize that as communities, we have global impact through supply chains and where our waste goes. So we have to recognize, so the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the construction materials to build our communities, and the electronics we use, what are the supply chains they're coming from? What are the energy and material ingrained within that? And how can we understand how we can best respect the health of the whole planet, reducing our impact in all these ways? And then thinking again of all those things, who picked and packed your food, who stitched and sewed your clothes, and who dug and transported those construction materials, and those people in those supply chains, how can we respect the well-being of those communities like ours on the other side of the world? So these are the 4 lenses we can then choose to explore and zoom in and recognize what they mean for our place, for our communities. But we can also really valuably look at the interconnections across all of them. And this is a new design canvas that we've got to explore all of these different factors. And we can look at existing policies that are already in place, like the Cornwall plan for 2020 to 2050. And we can see the policies that are existing in the initiatives that are already underway. We can look at the connections between those. We can see the initiatives and the ideas and the opportunities and potential gaps in those plans. And we can invite and be inclusive about how we bring in the voices of young people, schools, but also in our communities, and how we bring in volunteers, the voice of volunteers and businesses. So everyone's contributing to what this plan could be. But this is such a holistic view to look at everything. So we can break it down by themes. So for example, taking Cornwall's food future, what does it mean in the local social context? What could it mean for health and education in the community, and culture and income and social equity? What could food in Cornwall mean for a thriving habitat, cleaning the air, housing biodiversity, storing carbon, building soil, and many more? What does it mean for global health? What does it mean for climate change, and how can we reduce our impact on extractive, degenerative agricultural practices and support the projects in communities like ours who are looking to bring about regenerative agricultural practices? And then what does it mean for the well-being of all people? And how can we support initiatives with international worker solidarity? Looking at a holistic vision of our future within sectors such as food, we can then begin to look at the existing targets and map these. We can look at what's already underway, what's the action already in motion. We can recognize the key challenges and work through those, and then begin new initiatives to explore those gaps. But then really importantly, we're thinking about the interconnections across all of these. no longer in systems, but in silos, but in full systems thinking. And so we offer this as a canvas for you to then use with your organizations and communities to explore these together. Here's an example of it in practice. Here's the community of the Brussels capital region, which was funded by the local government and run by a participatory organization who involved the community at all different scales. They looked at 4 scales from the macro down to the nano, and here's an example of them exploring the interconnections of the use of a mobile phone, how it can support your social needs locally, but also the impacts of what that might mean in global supply chains. Here's what they've come up with in Melbourne. Regen Melbourne is a network of more than 40 organizations and 500 people who are coming together to imagine what it means to be a thriving Melbourne. And here are the 6 things they came up with for their first lens of what it means to be thriving locally. And so they're now working with the city to bring this into being, and also they now explore the more global reach of their work. In Cornwall, action's already underway with the Cornwall County Council Decision Wheel. In partnership with Exeter University, this has been going since the end of 2019, drawing in more data and improving the decisions that are taken within the council to make them more holistic, and iterating as they go, constantly looking to how they can improve this process. But also from the grassroots perspective, back in 2018, Café Disruptif hosted this pioneering community event around donut economics to explore what does it mean to connect change makers across all the different actors in society in your place. And they came up with the donut playbook, the easiest community donut recipe ever. And you can find that on the Donut Economics website as well. And so if you want to become a part of this, go to the Café Disruptif website and sign up to their newsletter and updates. And this is a beautiful visual from their latest conversation. And they're going to be hosting more conversations going forward. So how can they use these frameworks to imagine Cornwall's future? But also, how do you engage everyone, not just the change makers who've been employed to do this? And Civic Square in Birmingham have got the most amazingly inviting, inclusive and imaginative ways of engaging people. Last weekend, here's some photos of children and people from of all ages and backgrounds, imagining what it might mean with this donut dreams diagram, playing on a chalk donut on the floor, having conversations of this menu of conversation card over at the big lunch. Kate went along and presented using this green inflatable donut with 2 6-year-old sidekicks to help. And they've created this wooden structure, an open source design that they've called the Donut Monument. This was them halfway to completion, but it then got filled with plants, and it's going to grow out into a lovely green sphere inside which you can be imagining a donut-shaped future.
And Rob, you have 5 minutes.
Fantastic, thank you. So these are many inviting ways that you can engage with these ideas and making them accessible to so many more people than the same old crowd. And you can find them all at donuteconomics.org, where we have a community of more than 7,000 changemakers around the world, across communities, cities, businesses, education, policymakers, who are sharing their ideas of these practices. And people are connecting, forming self-organizing groups of practitioners in lots of different scales, in all different contexts. And you can find tools, stories, and events to co-create new tools. So I invite you to have a look at those. And here are some of I've just given you a few examples, but here you can read into the examples I've given today in far more detail, and hear what the people of the place are describing them as, and also the tools to use. And these are just a few of the tools: the Cornwall Donut Playbook, Donut Dreams, and also the book club guide, which has been co-created by the community. So we've seen that people find it so useful to go chapter by chapter through the book and then see how they can apply those ideas in principle. And we also have an event coming up on the 24th of June to co-create 10 ways to introduce the donut, so in playful ways to make it really accessible. But this can really help you access the ideas, engage the ideas, and come up with a shared vision. But what are our powers to act, actually turn these visions into action? So the last thing I'm going to share with you in the last few minutes is a sense of what are our individual and collective powers to act. So as collectives in our organizations, what are the things that determine the design traits of our organizations to determine whether we can achieve this type of action? Well, what we found is that so many places are still tied to the view of how we can make our organization or place grow. That's like, how can we increase GDP? How can we increase big business? How can we increase the number of tourists? And it's a view that's been often given to us that we've inherited. But how can we pivot forward and actually think instead, how can we make our place thrive, whether or not we grow? And so what determines which way we point, which way our organizations are designed? And we think there are 5 things. Firstly is our purpose, whether it's orientated in one way or the other, and what's our power to actually co-create a new purpose that is towards thriving. Networks, who are the people we're in relation with, and how are they holding us accountable to those values? And how can we mobilize diverse stakeholders to come around this challenge together, like the donut, like the Cornwall Donut Collective? In terms of governance, who's making the decisions, and how can we shape those decisions and hold people accountable and enforce ambitious policy to start transforming our local economy? Ownership, who owns the sources of wealth creation, and how can we recognize our ability to, as our organizations, to own and access and operate local assets and services? And most importantly, what are the sources of finance, and which way is that pointing? And how can we raise and redirect finance towards a goal of thriving? And so I invite 2 questions. We can point one way or the other. So in what way are organizations pointing to an extractive economy, still holding us back to more degenerative and divisive means? But what's already driving us forward towards a donut-shaped economy? What are the ways we can design our organizations to be far more regenerative and distributive by design? And what does this mean at the various scales? So we can see we have power and agency across all of these scales, from our community organizations to international organizations, communities of leaders like we have gathered here on the call, or community of international leaders that are currently gathering in Carbis Bay for the G7. And so we can map where all our powers to act lie across all of these, and recognize what can we stop doing within the scope of our work and start doing towards a more regenerative goal. But also recognize what lies beyond us. What do we need to work with other people to form more strategic, longer-term partnerships? And so, in summary, how do we get into the donut? By 2 key means: by being regenerative by design and distributive by design. By recognizing all of the roles within the economy that we move seamlessly between, and how we can redesign the economy to create balance across all of these, and recognizing the value that's created in each. We can look into all of the lenses and the interconnections across these, and how we can identify new opportunities and synergies across them, thinking in systems, thinking holistically. And we can think about our visions that we've created, how we can then translate that into action across all of these design traits of our organizations to move them away from an extractive economy and pivot it towards the place of thriving. So do join us at donuteconomics.org, where you can pick up these tools and immediately start applying them, and then share your stories back with others to inspire more. So that's the end of what I'm going to share, and I'll hand back to Helen and Tom.
Thank you so much, Rob. That was, again, really amazing and super informative. And I can't wait to get my hands on those resources that you've shared. Check out your event on the 24th of June and also get involved in that conversation. I love the way, again, you've captured the use of imagination. You've inspired us to think more regeneratively. That's a hard one to say, isn't it? A regenerative and distributive economy. And I've popped that question there in the chat: how can you make Cornwall thrive, making it regenerative and distributive? And I'll leave that with colleagues over the lunch break as well. I love everything you said today. I'm so impressed and delighted that you've joined us, and I know my colleagues would have loved it. And I'm going to shine a spotlight on Alistair Young, because I know he's an avid fan of the donut economy, so I know he would have been on the edge of his seat. So I'd just like to invite our colleagues to, again, put their cameras on, take their mics off mute, and give you a huge round of applause.
Great stuff.
So colleagues, hopefully we're going to be joined now from colleagues in the breakout room. who are going to come back in a few seconds. You'll be pleased to know we are going to move into our lunch break. And we've got a couple of really amazing films to show you if you'd like to stay online over lunch and have a look at those amazing films. And Tom will say a little bit more about that in a moment. And also, if you feel so inclined, we do have one more Mentimeter question for you, if you would like to do that as well over lunch break. And Tom will pop that up in a moment. And then when we get back after lunch, hopefully in and around 12:30, if you can come back at 12:30, we'd be hugely grateful. I know we've shaved a couple of minutes off your lunch break. We've got Professor Sir Michael Marmot and that really exciting conversation. And I know some of our colleagues have been prepped to engage with that. So that's going to be great. So Tom, do we have the Mentimeter and you're ready to show films? And colleagues, you're more than welcome to continue to plug in or go and relax, but I'll see you back at 12:30.
Yep, so the link to Mentimeter, same link as previously, is in the chat box. And I will bring that up on the screen now just so we can see some of the answers already coming in, which is brilliant. Also, over lunchtime, feel free to, you don't need to leave the session, just turn your camera off. You can turn your audio off as well. But just, stay in the session. And as Helen said, we'll be running 3 videos over the course of the lunch if you want some entertainment whilst you eat. So I'll pop that link in the chat box again and to Menti. And I'll just share the question now. So the question is, what could you do to improve collaboration in your community? I think there's already a lot of food for thought there based off Rob's conversation. And though I wasn't in Sarah's session, I'm sure that that had much to take away for this question too. So if you are just coming back from Sarah's session, we're just about to jump into a lunch break. But I've popped a link to a Menti question in the chat box. What could you do to improve collaboration in your community? So that's the question for over lunchtime, and we'll be playing a few videos as well before we return at 12:30.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, colleagues. And we can see they're coming through. Listening is key, and being really open when you communicate, building bridges. That's coming through really loud and clear, and yeah, support and a chance to really offer skills as well and share good news is a way to build collaboration. So leave that one with colleagues to keep contributing to, and I'll see you after lunch at 12:30. Thank you all. Thanks.
Okay, let's kick off. So welcome everyone to the second breakout session. I'd like to introduce Sara Marsh, who's the Chief Executive of Trubburn Community Trust. Apologies, I think I mispronounced that again, Sara. Zara and her team of volunteers set up a community larder using a folding table initially, and that's grown into a co-created delivery space for multi-agencies with residents of a traveller site nearby. So I hand over to Sara for this fascinating and inspiring story of going from 0 to 60 in a pandemic. If people would like to ask questions, please post them in chat during the talk, or there is a raise your hand function, so you can raise your hand and we'll come back to you near the end with any questions. If not, if they're in chat, we can capture them and we'll work to get those answered and responded to afterwards. So over to you, Sara.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brenda, and good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see so many people joining us. Many of you I already I know already. So yeah, the kind of 0 to 60 in the pandemic. I've got some slides that I'm going to whiz through with you, and then there's a short film towards the end of it, which I'm hoping my broadband will cope with. And then hopefully we'll have some time for some questions and a bit of kind of interaction after that. So I'm going to try and share this with you, and hopefully can everyone see?
Yes, we can. Yep.
Great. Progress. Okay. So I've been working at Relive Community Trust for best part of 7 years, and I've seen it grow from a small group of well-intentioned residents to a well-managed and widely respected charity. It runs a number of social and environmental projects in mid-Cornwall, and all address a local need in some way. Co-creation is intrinsically embedded in all that we do. The vast majority of people involved in creating and delivering our projects are local residents themselves. I'm going to share with you a whistle-stop tour of the past 16 months from 0 to 60 a pandemic as a reflection of the rate of change that we've had to embrace since February last year. So this is what our Facebook timeline looked like last February, a great reflection of the wide variety of events and activities that were going on at our community centre. The normal things that one associates with a vibrant community hall, where health and wellbeing classes, a film club, bingo, community cafe, social events and more besides. Our hall was well used, with over 50 activities happening each month, and 91 organisations using us throughout the year, and about 25,000 visits from local residents. That all came to quite a resounding stop in March when the COVID pandemic hit. With much of our earned income ceasing, all project staff were furloughed, leaving just 2 core staff members. Amidst a huge amount of uncertainty, our trustees and remaining staff decided to continue to support and respond to community needs and to help where we possibly could. Many of our volunteers, including most of our trustees, were older and more vulnerable, so also unable to provide any frontline support. In just a few days, we had to radically rethink what we were doing and how we could do it. And the single biggest shift was moving from being hall-based, where people came together, to community-based, where we were taking a service out into the community. Our initial response in our first few weeks was to ensure that the most vulnerable people in our community were safe and supported. We created and printed 2,000 lists of go-to information, phone numbers and websites, and we still use that list, update and use it today for signposting. We collated a list of people that we need to be isolated and vulnerable. 3 of our trustees took on the mammoth task of making 64 weekly phone calls to people to make sure that they were okay and they were safe. We set up a helpline and with a grant from Cornwall Community Foundation, a crisis grant scheme, and staff members available 24/7. This meant not only could we help people quickly in crisis, but we were also getting real-time data to help shape what we did and where we did it. It quickly became apparent that many people are experiencing problems accessing supermarkets and food. We changed our main hall into a food store. Basically, we filled it with tinned fruit and veg and pasta and rice. People ordered from that. Volunteers came in, picked the orders and went out, often delivered them on an individual basis. And while many of our existing volunteers had to stay at home or shield, we did see an amazing number of community-minded people come forward, really wanting to help their neighbours. And we revised our volunteer induction process, risk assessments and ongoing support so that people are empowered to volunteer within a coordinated structure, keeping both volunteers and vulnerable people safe. Much of this was new to us. Literally, we were making it up as we went along. Everything that all the new stuff we evolved needed some kind of system to make it work. We were constantly, like daily, having to revise it. Constant change was about the only constant thing at this time. Assessing the need, searching for a solution, testing it, and almost continuously adjusting it have been absolutely key to overcoming issues. By May 2020, the demand for bought groceries dropped. Supermarkets are getting themselves sorted with more delivery and collection slots available, so we wound this up. However, a more worrying trend was emerging, one linked to income or lack of. The economic impact of COVID is being felt everywhere, but the communities with underlying deprivation have been obviously less resilient. Many people living in the China Clay area were working and just about managing, but reduced hours, furlough, redundancy, or for the many self-employed, no income, that meant just about managing turned into no longer managing. And we saw an exponential increase in the numbers of people seeking emergency food support. People were telling us they needed help. So in April last year, in response to the growing food poverty, we decided to trial the community larder, collecting supermarket surplus and offering it to people on a help yourself basis. Our first pop-up larder, a Facebook post went out about 10:30. Within half an hour, all the food had gone. The feedback we got was really positive, and the number of the days that the larder was open grew from once a week to 5 days a week to 7 days a week, as we were able to get more and more collections from supermarkets. So the magic ingredients for a community larder are really quite small in what you need. Community larders are open for everyone to access. The key message for us is about tackling food waste. However, alongside this, we also offer emergency food bags, which is a top-up shop of dried and ambient food. These are available on a self-referral basis and available for anyone who needs a little extra help to tide them over. Small grants and community donations have helped us fund the purchase of food stocks for this. All you need for a community larder is a table, a community space inside or out, a local donor supermarket, a couple of volunteers, a risk assessment, registration as a food business, and some public liability insurance. Having realised just how simple a community larder is to set up, we were keen to share and support others to do similar. So in May last year, when RAP announced they were open for applications to tackle food waste, we filled in the form. Thankfully, our application was successful and we were able to employ a community larder coordinator. This role has not just enabled us to support our local community, but has given us the capacity to support others to learn from us and quickly establish community larders in other areas. Between April and June last year, we noticed peaks in demand for emergency food support from several neighbouring communities. Rural Cornwall is not known for its well-served public transport system, so for many, accessing the community larder at the hall was impossible. Initially, we had volunteers delivering food on an individual basis, but the demand was growing so quickly that it actually made more sense to take the food to a central point within that community and have people come and access it from there. So we decided to take the community larder on tour. In June, we piloted an outreach community larder to a local traveller community where about 1,000 people live. We literally rocked up in my small Kia Picanto, which is a tiny car, with a table and a carload of food. Thankfully, the sun shone and people came along and the food went. The following weeks, numbers grew. Now, there are 2 organisations running 4 community larders there every week, literally supporting hundreds of people within that community. Thankfully, our distribution is now done from the mobile community larder, which is a long wheelbase, high top van. It's big enough to transport the quantity of food now needed. So community larders do multiple things. They help prevent food waste. They enable people to access free food and to engage in carbon reducing action. This is really important in providing dignity and access to food support in a kind, inclusive and non-judgmental way. They provide a space where we can develop relationships, build trust, and help people access other services and support too. The latter is perhaps the most important part. To be honest, I feel very uncomfortable with any words of praise about what great work we've been doing. Community larders are tackling 2 issues that really shouldn't exist: food waste and food poverty. But the community larders themselves are providing us with opportunities to do something about this. At Minorca Lane, we've been working with the Citizens Advice Bureau, local GP surgery, Community Energy Plus and others, so that other support services are available to residents. Later this month, we're taking our van along to trial a weekly pop-up info van, offering a drop-in service for residents, complete with Wi-Fi hotspot, experts, tea, and of course cake. We'll see what happens, we'll listen to what people say, and we'll adapt and change as we go. So what does co-design mean for us? Well, it's been about listening, understanding what the need is, about trialling one solution such as deliveries, recognising that it wasn't the most effective mechanism, trying something else like the pop-up community larder, seeing that grow and figure out how that growth can be managed, going from a small car to a large van, and increasing frequency. If our community larder network was a start-up business where the tonnage of waste prevented and the numbers of people accessing them was the equivalent profit, we'd have investors queuing up. In just over 12 months, we've gone from one table once a week to 11 partners running 34 community larders in 22 locations. 130 volunteers are now involved every week in the network. Each week, they make about 50 collections to 17 supermarkets. In the last 12 weeks alone, have redistributed over 10 tonnes of food. So I'd like to share with you a short film that we made at Christmas. It's a bit, what did my daughter say? Not very professional, but it's quite raw. And it just kind of gives you a bit of a flavour of how a community space changed and adapted to meet an emerging need. So bear with me one sec. Hopefully this will just go straight through.
I don't know if yeah, I don't know if anyone else can see the film, but it's not coming through for me, I'm afraid so. You may need to change which your the screen that you're sharing.
Are you not getting to see the? Can you not see the film?
No, we're still seeing what adapting looks like.
Okay,
Slide.
I'll skip that bit then. I was watching it quite merrily. Okay. So one of the most recent challenges that we've experienced has been the reopening of our community hall, not because of the additional COVID restrictions, but because we didn't actually have any space. What on earth do we do with all the food? There's no way we can host dance or yoga, ballet or bingo around the piles of tins and boxes of veg. So we made a small leap of faith, and with some funding from DEFRA, we were able to take on a short-term lease for an industrial unit. And that has really proved a heaven-sent gift, really. It provides a storage facilities not just for Urban Community Trust, but for the other partners that we're working with. It is a hub where food comes in, goes out from. We've got freezers there and fridges, and it's just incredible what goes through there and what the team that are achieving there. We've also been able to employ another staff member to help with manage the daily logistics. I was asked yesterday about what our strategy is. I have to say that much of what we've been doing has been reactive. So I guess our strategy actually is to listen, understand, and be agile enough to respond quickly, but also to try and think beyond the next step and trying to put in some kind of mechanisms and measures that actually help reduce the need for food poverty, the information van, signposting and support being one of those. And we're also starting to explore some other maybe financially sustainable models like cooperative food groups and people's supermarkets. So I think those will be the direction that we move in over the coming months. Personally, I think everyone should have access to a community larder. If our small network alone can divert 40 tonnes a year, just imagine what could be achieved if there really was a larder in every community. If you're interested in setting up a community larder, please get in touch. We're very happy to share our knowledge, contacts, risk assessments, etc. And we're planning a couple of sessions over the summer to help get groups started. And there's still some spaces available on that if you're interested or you know anyone that is. Here's my contact details. Thanks for listening, and hopefully we've got time for some questions if anyone's got any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Sara. Really inspiring. So yeah, open to the floor. If anyone's got any questions, please raise your hand or put them into the chat.
Matthew has, I think.
Okay.
So I don't know if we're all on mute. Good morning. Brilliant presentation, Sara. Thank you. I was just wanting to, Jenny commented on the way you're looking after volunteers in the chat. I just wanted to see if you've got a few more seconds to tell us a little bit about how people you help are helping you help other people, how you're involving participants, especially in Minorca Lane context, and if what have been the practical issues around that. Thank you.
So within Minorca Lane, we've many of the people there are not. Some of the people there are now involved in helping us redistribute the food there, and are very much involved in sharing information amongst the community there. The van at the moment goes there on a weekly basis, and we see numbers of people come along to that, and they are picking up on behalf of neighbours. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah, most of the volunteers that are actively involved in the provision of the community larders are themselves either currently beneficiaries or have been beneficiaries.
Okay. And Jenny's asked in the chat, is any work taking place with food producers and suppliers about minimising surplus food, which is one aspect of a challenge of waste?
We haven't been doing that. I suppose in minimising waste, we've been enabling them to divert food from waste to being food rather than it being wasted. And most of our donations come from supermarkets. Although having said that, the other day, yesterday, day before, Babs was out, I know, collecting from all the police hubs, the surplus food from the G7.
I'm not sure she's allowed. I'm not sure we're allowed to say that.
Oh, I didn't say that.
No, we're collecting it from the other public service hubs.
Okay. But yes, the community larders are providing a very valuable mechanism for redistributing food that would otherwise go to waste. Why food producers aren't looking at that waste as wasted profit, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking some of the energy of that could go into the sort of front end of that, and working with those families that are struggling for whatever reason. It just seems that we're almost taking the surplus as a given, and focusing a lot of energy on what you do with that surplus rather than saying, actually, if you produce less, cut your costs, You know, can some of that cost saving go back into, you know, challenging some of the structural inequalities that result, you know, with people then, you know, requiring food handouts? That was just my thinking, but I know there's a lot that needs unpicking to get anywhere close to that.
I think that would be a brilliant place to get to, wouldn't it?
Yeah, very interesting point, and as you say, a great place to get to. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Jenny. I've just had a prompt for us to go back into the main room. Also, so I just wanted to say thank you very much to Sara for that. What we will do, Sara, I've checked with the team. We can reach out to you, get a copy of that video, and make sure it's distributed with the slides and all the post-event material that will be going out in the next couple of weeks. So, yeah, thank you all very much for your time and for joining. I'm sure you'll join me in thanking Sara for that and wishing her all the best moving forward. If everyone would like to rejoin the main room, you can follow the link, or you should have a control that allows you to go back. Yeah, Tom's just posted one in the agenda, so you'll be able to follow that link to get back into the main room. But thank you all very much, and thank you again, Sara, for that.
Thanks, Brendan. Thank you, everyone.